Hello, I am here to talk to the school board about mental health in education. So first of all, why do we need mental health education at schools? Why is it important to talk about mental health, and why is it important to get funding for mental health? Well, that's easy, because it matters. Students are struggling with problems in their heads, and I used to be one of those students. When I was in high school, I struggled with depression and anxiety, so much so that sometimes I would get no sleep at all, and then I'd be expected to go to school and to pay attention all day, even though my eyes were drooping and I could barely stay awake. And had to try to get good grades, and I did, but my mental health suffered significantly. Students are dealing with puberty changes, new life changes, and students going from middle school to high school are experiencing transitional changes in their lives as they transfer from one school to another, and different friend groups form, and societal pressures, the things they see on social media, can be really hard for students' self-esteem. Girls could see people who look like Kylie Jenner, and they might want to starve themselves just to look like that. And boys might see guys who look like Chris Hemsworth and think that they need to go to the gym 24 hours a day, otherwise they'll never be the perfect man. And so with all this in their minds, it can be really hard to focus on schoolwork. And 1 in 5 kids has some sort of mental health disorder, according to a study done by NPR. And 80% of those kids do not get the help that they need, which means that it can transform itself into disruptive behavior, more absences at school, higher dropout rates, and lower achievement on tests and homework. So that's just a little bit about mental health, but I'm not going to be able to cover everything because it would fill books and books. But the main point is that mental health is a problem that we need to address, because we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, and a lot of students can't get the needs of their mental health met, which means that they can't meet their educational needs. So, according to a study done at universities in the UK, this was in an article written by Nick Bennett in a Forbes article. When asked about emotional education, 52% of these UK students said that they think it would help them understand how to take care of themselves and others better. And also when asked about their emotional health, 88% of these students feared that they are emotionally unprepared for the real world. So this is university students talking. Imagine high school students answering that question. Now, these university students have had more schooling and more preparation for the real world, and yet most of them are still terrified of it. And so how do you expect a high school student who knows he doesn't want to go to college, who has to get dropped off into the real world right away, how is he supposed to be emotionally prepared for this big adjustment to his life if he has gotten no sort of emotional education to back him up? Not only that, but 99% of grad school employers think that emotional education at undergrad would increase student employment chances. So imagine how much better employment chances would be for students who have had emotional education throughout their whole educational career, starting from kindergarten to 12th grade, continuing into college. Beyond that, these same grad school employers who were interviewed and part of the study said that they value communication, teamwork, and self-motivation above grades. And all of those, communication, teamwork, self-motivation, those are all severely affected by mental health. Because if you are struggling with depression, it is really hard to motivate yourself to get out of bed some days. And if that's what employers are looking for, then we need to prepare students to be able to work through their mental problems and to address them. So I recommend that we institute emotional education at our school. This is not new. This has been done before. In fact, according to an article in Upworthy, the Florida State Board of Education voted to require, for grades 6th grade up, to have at least 5 hours of mental health education, mental health instruction every year. Now, 5 hours a year is barely anything. I had to do more service learning hours than that in a quarter. So I'm suggesting that we follow suit and also require a minimum hours of mental instruction at our school. Now, I would up this from 5 hours to 10 at least in a year. And it's important that we get trained professionals who know what they're talking about to lead these instructional seminars on mental health. It is also important that we get more counselors in our schools, because the recommended ratio for guidance counselors is 250 students to every 1 counselor. And according to an article on Education Drive, only 3 states are below that ratio, while every other state in the U.S. is well surpassing that ratio, which means that they have more than 250 students per counselor. So I suggest that we set money aside specifically for mental health and mental health education. This means we need more funding for guidance counselors and social workers, because the guidance counselor ratio applies to social workers as well, and social workers can be the in-between between families and students, because some of the roots of those mental health problems can go back to family trauma as well. And so it's important to set aside this funding for guidance counselors, social workers, educational programs, the ones I talked about, that we could use at least once a month for parents and staff and students to attend. And I recommend that we hire either a outside source to lead these emotional educational seminars, or we find someone in-house who is trained enough or can get the training that we would pay for to lead these emotional education seminars. So think about all the funding that we have for sports and for choir and all those other things, and consider how much better sports and choir and grades, how all of those could be improved by working our way from the inside out. So if we improve mental health, we can improve our overall school. We'll have happier students, we'll have more successful students, and I think that it will greatly benefit our school if we follow Florida's example, Florida of all states, Florida's example of requiring mental health education in the schools. Another thing that I would like to address before I go is the stigma of mental health. So I know that sometimes people laugh at certain mental health disorders and can laugh at the symptoms of mental health, and especially the fact that some people will go to therapists or guidance counselors. That can be laughed at or looked down upon. And I want us to focus on not only increasing our education on mental health, but improving our outlook on it. In order to destigmatize mental health problems, we need to allow students to see that mental health exists. So showing them examples of mental health, showing them signs and symptoms so that they can identify it in themselves without scaring them, and allowing the staff to talk about it in an open way. I think that sharing personal stories is a really great way to open up to students, to connect to them, while also showing them that it's okay to be open and that it's okay to have a mental health disorder, that it's not going to ruin your life necessarily, that it is okay and that you can work through it. I do believe that if we incorporate little mental health tips and tricks into each classroom, that it will be more manageable for everyone. So even a math classroom can have time for meditation, time to decompress, a little quiet zone for students to work on their own if they're feeling anxious. Especially in English classes, we can emphasize journaling as a way to get your thoughts out there. And art is a great way to express to express your feelings in a healthy way. And so I just want us as a school, as a community, to get behind mental health education. So thank you for listening to me today, and I hope that you will take my concerns seriously.